Welcome back to the Engineered Angler. I don't know if you can see out that window, but it's a dark and dreary Sunday morning, and I've been doing just some run-of-the-mill experimentation and getting them in my UV chamber. But today we're going to make a lure. So the lure we're going to make is a walk the dog topwater lure, and it's probably one of the most popular lures out there, and it's actually pretty simple to make. Just got to keep a couple of design criteria in mind. The key to getting a lure to actually walk the dog on the surface is to have the center of gravity well behind the center of drag. And I've explained this in other videos, and a good visual for this explanation is a common dart. Because as most people will know, a dart will have its center of gravity well forward of the center. And the center of drag is going to be the little tail feathers. So a dart is really dynamically stable when you throw it point first, right? But if you try to throw it tail first, it will turn. And that's because the center of drag is forward of the center of gravity. And that's what you want here. You want it to be backwards to what a dart is. So as you pull it, the drag acts on the front of the lure, and the center of gravity wants to keep moving through inertia and results in a very quick and snappy turn, and it makes it very easy to walk the dog when the lure is set up this way. We'll carve this lure out of a piece of wood. I think I have some cypress laying around. I'm going to use. It's light, it's easy to carve. But before we move on to actually building, I just want to remind you guys that if you enjoy these kind of videos, certainly drop me a like and subscribe if you haven't. And if you have friends who are interested in getting started making lures, certainly share this stuff with them. It really does help to build the channel. Let's get a piece of wood. All right, so I've got the piece of wood. I've cut it to about 3 3/4 inches long. It's about an inch thick, but the lure will probably end up being right around 5/8 of an inch in diameter. I'm not going to make it perfectly round. It would be very easy to put this on the lathe and make a perfectly round lure. And if you'll think of some of the most popular walk the dog lures like the Head and Spook, you'll note that they're perfectly round. They look like sort of tapered off dowels, and that's perfectly okay. I mean, you can make yours that way. I'm going to make mine a little more stylized, not much. We're going to design the shape of the lure to sort of maximize our chance of getting turbulent flow up close near the head of the lure, and that'll improve the odds for us to get that center of drag forward of the center of gravity. All right, so the shape you want to avoid, let's look at that first. The shape you want to avoid is a perfect sort of teardrop aerodynamic foil shape. This is a very aerodynamically efficient shape, and you want to avoid this kind of shape. And you don't want faired curves. In other words, a continuous clean curve without any flat spots. Now, I didn't draw mine very well. What you want is for your lure to have some amount of flatness along the first third of your lure. The tie-on eye is below the center of the lure, and so is my tail eye. I'm going to have my belly hook eye right about at the 1/3 mark for the lure. If you follow these basic guidelines, avoid that perfectly streamlined shape and try to get some flat areas near the front of your lure and get the weight behind the center mark of the lure, you should end up with a lure that is real easy to walk the dog. All right, so what I've done is just sort of sketched in the shape that I want to get on this piece of wood right on a piece of masking tape. This way it's real simple and quick. The details aren't so important to me. What's important to me is the general concept to try to get turbulent flow real early on in this body. All right, I'm going to cut this out in the bandsaw. All right, that's a pretty decent cut. Now I'm just going to take this random block. I'm going to just do a couple of contour lines. So now I know that the center is right here. I can eyeball that center real easy. And now it's just a matter of drawing in the taper of the body. So I know I want the wide spot 1/3 of the way back, and I want it to be no wider than 5/8. So I'll put my guidelines, my little guide marks there for the 5/8, and now I can just taper it in. You can do this with just about any kind of a French curve or drafting curve. Now this curve has a little bit of a flat area here, and I'm trying to utilize it, but if I end up with too fair a curve and it looks just a little too aerodynamic, I'll spoil that a little bit by sanding the area around the 1/3 mark just a little bit flatter than the rest of it. And to be sure I get sort of the same curve on both sides, what I've done is I've marked spots on my curve and I lay that in the right place. This one on this side I kind of screwed it up, but I fixed it, so I know which one to cut. All right, let's start cutting. All right, so I'm pretty happy with the shape. There's already some decent symmetry in there, which is kind of important. Not super important on a lure like this, but still, at least for aesthetics, you want to have some symmetry. To create a rounded shape for this lure body, I'm going to have to take a lot of meat off at the corners. I'll start it with a razor knife, and I'll take off just a little bit, just enough to make my life a little bit easier when I get over there to the power sander and get this thing actually shaped. All right, well, I haven't taken a whole lot off, but I think it'll reduce the belt sander time quite a bit. Man, it is still just pouring out there. So hopefully these flat spots that are already on here just by the nature of the piece of wood, I can carry on into the final shape without having it be too blocky. But I do want some flatness on there. I'm more concerned with sort of the sides than I am with the top and the bottom. So I'm gonna round off the tops and bottoms pretty round, and then the side will have some flatness to them. So it's important, even in the early stages, that you try to achieve some symmetry in the shape. Even as you're taking off a lot of material, you don't want to get too far off symmetry, because then you can't chase it back. There won't be enough material and you'll end up with some weird gouge. While it still has a lot more sanding and shaping, I'm going to do it by hand because this takes off way too much too fast. But I do have the nice flat spots I want. I can see where I've got a couple of humps that I've got to take out, and of course all the sanding marks from this machine. So back into the shop and just doing a bunch of hand sanding. So at this point I'm really working on aesthetics. I've got the shape that I want and I've got the flat spots I want. I just want to make sure there's no weird humps and marks from the sander. Now the flat spots I'm talking about are pretty subtle. It's not like you're going to see a big flat plane on the side of the lure. It's just that as the curve goes out from the nose and then around to the wide spot, it isn't perfectly curved. It has a little bit of a flat kind of chamfer and then sort of starts to round again. And that's key to getting some turbulence early on the body, because shapes like this will have laminar flow around this shape, and then as the flow nears the departure point back here, you will start seeing some turbulence back here, and the drag is pretty far back on the body. What we want is for the laminar flow to break up early here and give us turbulent flow on back. All right, so I've done basically all the shaping sanding I'm going to do. I'll do a little bit more to take some of these marks out, clean it up aesthetically just a little bit, but I'm pretty happy with the symmetry of it, the way it sort of tapers to the head, and the way it tapers to the tail as well. Okay, so I've got it as nicely sanded as I'm going to get it right now. I'll get the little nicks and marks out of it when I put that first clear coat on it, and I'll use that as sort of a fairing compound. Now I want to go ahead and drill the holes for the tie-on eye, the tail eye, and the belly hook eye. All right, that's all three eyes. Let's glue them in. All right, so these things are glued in and they're set up. Now let me show you how I establish where to put the weight, because I got to drill the hole for the weight. I also want to go ahead and set in some eye sockets too. All right, first I take and put a little strip of tape right along the center line, or close enough to the center line. You don't really need much because I know that the center of mass is going to be somewhere in there. And now I'm going to take just a pin. This is just a little push pin, and I'm going to push a hole in this tape every, let's say, 1/8 of an inch, maybe a little less. All right, that should be plenty. Now I'm going to draw a level line, and you can just draw something like this on a piece of paper and then put it up on a tack board and it'll work just fine. And now I got a little hanging wire, and I'm going to hang the lure on that, but first I'm going to put the hooks that I'm going to use on there. And now I'm going to poke this thing through one of the holes where I think it might balance. And you can see it's floating just a little bit tail down, and that's about how I want it. So I'm going to add all my weight right there. You can see that if I had gone one little hole over, it would have been a lot more tail down. All right, so there's my mark, and I'm just gonna eyeball it over to the belly, and this is where I'm gonna put my weight. All right, let's get a clear coat on this thing. Okay, so I've gone ahead and wiped it down with some denatured alcohol, and now I've put it on my lure bow to keep it nice and stable and I don't have to touch it again. That should do it. Now it's time to put it in the turner. And I'll go ahead and let it turn for about 5 minutes without the lights on, just to be sure that the bubbles all kind of pop, and then I'll turn the lights on. I should be able to get this out in about 30 minutes. All right, it's been about 35 minutes, and it looks pretty good. There's a couple little warbles in it, but that's what I was expecting. And it's going to give me a little bit of an opportunity to clean up the surface just a bit. All right, so this is another opportunity to do a little sanding, my favorite thing. All right, let's do some painting. I'm going to go ahead and wipe it down again. Let's start off turning it white. Next step is opaque yellow. Now I'm going to use this fluorescent orange for the belly. All right, now I'm going to use opaque black to create some blotches and spots that's going to go underneath the scales. Should give me a kind of a cool pattern. All right, now I'm going to use, this is Apple Green by Createx. This is a Wicked Paints. This is Moss Green, also Wicked Paints. All right, looks pretty cool. All right, I kind of rushed through this because the sun is almost peeking out. At least it stopped raining, and I'm hoping that I can get a clear coat to set on this thing and we can take it out to the lake and maybe even do a afternoon session on the boat. But here it is. I put some red on the very bottom there. Now I'm going to put some eyes on it and put a mid coat of the polyacrylic sprayed on with the airbrush, and then hopefully I'll be able to dry it quickly and we'll get a good clear coat. Usually I don't rush these things this much. Even when I want to rush them, this is actually kind of an extreme case. I like to let the paint set up either overnight or at least a few hours to make sure that I don't get some weird problem later on that it ends up delaminating or something. All right, I'm going to go ahead and close this thing up, and I'll let it rotate for just a little bit, and then I'll turn the lights on and I'll come back to it in about 45 minutes, an hour, and we should still have a little bit of light. All right, it's been about an hour and it looks good still. So let's take a peek. All right, that looks really nice. You can see there's a couple little blemishes, but that's to be expected on that first coat. I'll give this thing another 2 coats and it'll be beautiful. But for right now, I'm putting some hooks on it and we're going fishing. See, it did a lot of raining today. Looks like we're gonna have a little bit of clear sky. You can see it floating pretty much flat like I had it, just slightly tail down. Look at that. Perfect. It's so easy and smooth to walk the dog with this thing. Has a really nice quick cadence. Well, the sun came out for this last little bit of fishing time. So maybe this will excite a fish to bite something. A little bit of shine. I have to say, this spring, the topwater bite has been absolutely dismal. Well, can't say I didn't try. But you gotta admit, it looks pretty good, and it walks the dog like a champ. So this will be it for today. Sun's going down, and I've got to go in and eat. I'll catch you next Friday on the next video.